Everybody, welcome back to the Platypus Playground. I started a little bit later today than I was anticipating, but we're going to have an interesting conversation today. Um, in a moment here, one of my good friends, Jesse, will be joining us to discuss something that impacts over 400 million people globally. He has worked with different people, both in legislative sessions and at both local and federal levels, to bring awareness to a issue that impacts all of these people. This issue is incontinence, both bladder and bowel. This isn't typically a topic I address head on here on the channel. Like many, I am impacted by it, and so are many others. But there's so many things that we don't know about. What are the costs when it comes to vulnerability? What are the costs when it comes to inaction? What are the consequences when we try and fix these issues with a suture versus a medical device or product that can help us both emotionally and physically both feel comfortable and just embrace day-to-day life without any of the negative consequences. I know that there are many surgeons that will tell you that it is a low risk procedure to resolve a lot of the bladder related issues. Although that may be true, we have to take into account people who are sensitive to anesthesia and all sorts of other medical or medications that are introduced during these procedures. So, without further ado, here is Jesse. He will be joining us now.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine. You're on. Go ahead and introduce yourself. I kind of did it a little bit already, but go for it.
My name is Jesse. I identify as a person with a disability, and I'm about 28 years old.
Fantastic. So, Jesse's shared some of these legal statements that he's been working on and pieces of legislation he's been working with lawmakers to introduce. In fact, one of them has already been introduced to the House in the United States, has it not?
Well, let me clarify that that is not something I take credit for completely, but it's an organization of people that have come together to try and meet this important health need. And how would you describe it as you've read over it?
I would describe it as both humane and kind of eye-opening. In these documents that he shared with me some documents. If I get his permission, when I get this thing published, I'll go back in and add these legal documents for people to read.
They're
But
public documents, you can share.
okay, perfect. So I'll go ahead and share those. Um, it was not just discouraging reading some of these negative statistics, but it was also eye-opening because you, like many Americans, struggle financially. And if you cannot support yourself to get the medications you need, how can you live a happy and healthy life? Because isn't that a part of our constitution to
Mhm.
pursue happiness, right? We have that right. But if the government is in a position to help, and we've kind of gotten to that point, shouldn't we be looking for a way to embrace those changes?
Yeah, and that involves collaboration and knowing when to put your differences aside because so often we see something either being a left or a right issue, but like the documentation I shared with you, it is a something that's supported bipartisan, both sides coming together to agree that these people need help getting access to what they need.
I was going to ask, are you familiar with some of these psychological studies that are coming out that are talking about the difference between neurodivergence and the ability to kind of see through different microcosms and be able to help others who aren't neurodiverse? Are you familiar with any of these studies?
I can't name any specifically, but I can understand the idea of what you're trying to say.
So there is a organization out of Chicago. It's called the Chicago Psych Services,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they did a survey and study to see if both neurodivergence or sexual fetishism can actually increase your ability to cope with stress and anxiety. A lot of people will say, "Oh, well, autistic people like you and I are have a higher predisposition for stress and anxiety." And in ways, I can see that being true. But when you have the right environment, I think a lot of that stress and anxiety goes away. I don't know if you would agree with that, but it just kind of seems to be the way. And that kind of backs up their study because what they're trying to argue is that these things in the right environment, both family, work, play, all of the things, can lead to people being more productive. People like you and I being more productive, more engaged with our communities, more interested in helping others than oftentimes helping ourselves, things
Mm-hmm.
like that. But usually, those types of things can have a positive impact. So I was hoping to get some of your thoughts on those.
Definitely. First thing I can think of is for like students in school being protected under the IDEA Act for being able to have an IEP or a 504 plan so that you can have accommodations to participate. When, excuse me, when I first started out as a student when I was younger, I was in a class with my twin brother who essentially has the mind of a 5 year old. And his needs are going to look different from mine when I learned how to read at an early age and I tried to be more social. But it took time for me to get there. And part of that included being recognized as not just a person with a disability in like math or handwriting, but social skills and knowing how to communicate. And unfortunately, it took me having to change schools because of a social conflict that ended up leading to me getting the help that I needed. And part of the reason I got into that conflict was because I didn't have the right supports. I was only treated for math and handwriting. And so when
Mm,
I would try to say, like to my teacher, hey, I need support in special education with social skills, she was like, oh, well, that's a personal problem. There's nothing we can really do to help you. But what she wasn't telling me was that there already was a social skills program at least being piloted. Now, that could have come from just not having the information, but at the same time, I also had to deal with a difficult teacher that, even though they say I was kind and polite, excuse me for just a sec.
oh, you're good. Um, well, I think something interesting that you're bringing up is that a lot of people, dog on technology. They ignore it
Mm-hmm.
in an interesting way because I feel like we're at an interesting intersection. There was a podcast that I was listening to this morning, short little thing. That's part of the reason why it started a little later than I wanted to. But in this conversation, I felt like it was very important to listen to this. A lot of people, on the conservative side are saying things like we're on the fourth turning and we have this and that and the other. But I think they're ignoring something more profound, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because every 80 years, the US goes through these different cycles. 80 years ago, we were, you know, going through the Great Depression. 80 years before that, we were at the end of the Civil War. And 80 years before that, we were at the very tail end and almost near collapse of the new country known as the United States of America. People forget that the US was not unified at victory of the Revolutionary War and that Washington himself did not want to be a leader. He did not want to be the president. Um, Benjamin Franklin convinced him to do so. and was very persuasive and won that argument. And because of that, we ended up having, you know, a great 8 years under a great American man, although flawed in many ways, right? And then at the end of the Civil War, we had the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and we put a military man in power thinking that would be a great resolution at the time because we were, still dealing with a lot of the consequences coming out of the Civil War. But the one thing all of these eras have in common is a huge boom in technology development and innovation. During the Civil War, for instance, there are many things that came around that we still use today. Things like the printing press, they got
Right.
simpler, they got easier to make, and those innovations enabled countless people to read. But at the same time, during this era, at the end of the Civil War, we introduced things like education, and not just education for the elite, but for everybody at all levels. And so you see the start of many, many universities that are known internationally to this day because of that moment in time. And what people don't realize about the, revolution era of the 1700s is that that era culminated with all of the inventions and technologies that Benjamin Franklin had made, and it led to the inspiration of many new technologies that would come much, much later, including the light bulb, electricity,
Hmm.
all because of curiosity. We're in the middle of a transition because usually there's about 25 years of stability, 24 years of complacency, and then about 25 years of decline. We're at the tail end of the 25 years of decline. And what comes in the next 25 years is going to be nothing short of extraordinary. Artificial intelligence um, not only has the power and the ability to bring those we've lost and help us mend and bring closure to ourselves after the loss of a loved one. They help us cope with different anxieties and stressors, new diagnoses of medical conditions and whatnot. All of those things are very important, right? And AI can help us do it. But something that AI can absolutely do that I think gets overlooked, it can take someone who is nonverbal on the autism spectrum and give them a voice.
Yeah, with text to speech and being able to, what matters is like the cost of distribution. Like if you can make it local to run on any device, free and open source, then yeah, that could help a lot of people. But like if you're going to do it as a business model of money instead of scale, then you're going to have less people being able to use it and feeling cut out. Like not too long ago, there was this 11 Labs reader that I really liked. And even though it started out free and it had good quality, not a whole lot of limits, eventually they had to put in a subscription in order to justify the cost of keeping it going. Now, I understand that from like a business perspective, but I believe that the value of having something open source so that anyone can review it and understand it, free enough to where it can be distributed onto different devices. Like the scale of what a computer can handle might be different from our smartphones. And another thing that concerns me is you see all these bans around technology in schools. And like my local school district, we invested in like iPads and iMacs and all these new technologies to sort of help us be more modern. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you should evaluate a student's level of free speech or like go through their personal posts unless you have a reason to. But at the
Well,
same
that's kind
time,
of like
when
the that's the threat risk analysis you have to be aware of, and I don't think enough people go through that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and like as much as technology helped me as a student with a disability, it helped me feel more engaged in what I was reading and the tasks that I was doing. It made the concepts of what I was learning feel more meaningful because I was connecting to it beyond just watching a video on a screen or reading text. I was taking all that information and using technology to express different ideas, different viewpoints. And I mean, something as simple as opening up Notebook LM and being able to like put in my personal journals, and then I could create like a mind map or a report, or I could listen to like an audio overview or a video overview. And being able to learn from those different formats sort of just reminded me that in school we had different learning styles. Not everyone learns the same way. And like there are some students that they might be able to read in their minds and process information, but when it comes to actually saying it out loud, it might be more of a challenge, or they might stutter or not always get their ideas across as clearly. And a lot of that has to come with accessibility and patience. Because like we're at an early age with AI where there's possibilities, but because it's so new, people are afraid of what they don't completely understand. Now, I know from a technical standpoint that pretty much the way it works is if you open up your phone's keyboard and you start typing out a message and you see like those three words pop up on your keyboard for that predictive text, that has been an early form of AI. And it's been around for years, and no one's really been as bothered by it. I mean, there is a debate, but at the end of the day, it's just kind of like a fancy version of autocorrect. Or if it was generating a picture, it would go pixel by pixel. If it was a video, it would go second by second.
And all AI is, to be honest here, is an algorithm. And that's why I find what you're doing for people with incontinence, people with other disabilities or families that can't get access to the products they need, you know, I think it's fascinating because, this is all integral with the forward momentum because artificial intelligence, a lot of people fear will take over and control our lives and destroy everything. But I think it's a little bit more simple than people think. Like,
Yeah,
a
it is a tool made by people for people, and it requires personal responsibility. And another thing that I was thinking of is like whenever you interact with Gemini and like Google Gemini, for example, there are human evaluators that go through these de anonymized prompts, like conversations. So they're not necessarily tied to your identity, but all the details that you input in there personally, including any attachments like documents, there's always the chance that it could be seen by another human. And so, with like HIPAA laws, for example, when it comes to like sensitive medical details that could be hard to open up about, you're protected when you're in a doctor's office with HIPAA. But whenever you're having a conversation with an AI, for example, and you share those personal details, it's not necessarily treated with the same level of privacy. So, as much as someone can carry out a conversation about a sensitive topic with it and find a sense of comfort or maybe a different way of processing it, there's still the levels of privacy and hallucinations that we have to look out for. And the
well,
same
and I
thing
think
comes
we're
with
heading
people
that
as
way.
well. Because with people, depending on mental illnesses, it can cause hallucinations. And sometimes, as people, we also get misinformation from different sources that might
Mm.
not always be correct. So, regardless of whether it's humans or AI, there's always going to be some level of error. You can't make it completely zero.
No. Well, and this is kind of what I'm thinking. Like we're in an era where consent laws are becoming more and more important. The United States is going through a little bit of an identity crisis, and they seem to be trying to roll those back. But I don't think that is going to have the benefit that people think it will. The rest of the world has moved on. You know, I mean, I looked at the number of people that were at the No Kings protests, right?
Mm-hmm.
People say that, especially people like Joe Rogan, they say that people that go and protest are lonely and losers. Well, sorry, Mr. Rogan, I don't think that's correct. If you have a voice, you have a obligation or a right to share those opinions, even if you're wrong. I'm not saying that they were wrong. Let's be clear about that. I think they were fantastic, because it shows how much power the people still have, even if it feels like it's very little at times, right? But it's so unique and really amazing because everything we're seeing is just kind of these indicative patterns that people are sick and tired of being told how to think, and they're ready to be vulnerable. They're ready to embrace change. They're ready to change not just the way they do things, but they're willing to listen to people to get advice on how to change their lives. And I think that right there is the future. And I mean, when we take care of ourselves, right, we can always help others. And so people say, oh, well, the government shouldn't be involved in our lives. I think that era is long gone. Um, and it's been gone for so long because we've gone from a country of less than 100 million people to a country over 300 million people. We've gone from a country surrounded in little enclaves on the eastern seaboard to a country that spans almost 4,000 miles. And that's before you include Alaska and Hawaii. And so I think it is important that we help people get where they want to be. It's the reason why Alaska has different incentives to encourage people to move to Alaska into these smaller communities to help revitalize places that have been forgotten. Other states are working on different permit processes, right? If you want to revitalize an old building that's been derelict for 20 years, you can go in, and as long as it's structurally stable, a lot of the times these buildings are either owned by cities or counties, and they require very little to no paperwork to sign in order to acquire the property. I think that is amazing because all of this enables you to have that growth, that development. And with consent laws being such a huge thing, I see that as the way forward. I think we're in the early stages of that, but there are free services to get artificial intelligence. They're just not affordable. You can go on GitHub and get source code for a lot of different algorithms and AI models. Um,
But it also requires the hardware resources, and hardware comes with a cost. And so some people, like I have a HP computer here that's not exactly top of the line or fancy, but I could run a smaller local
yeah,
model on there.
exactly. I mean, it's not going to know everything, but it's going to do enough to help you get by. You could do
Right.
all sorts of
Like I
things.
could still, like, let's say I lose my internet, for example. If I had a model that was local and efficient enough and still had enough context, I could get by with it offline. And I think back to people that might not always be able to pay the internet bill, or back when I was going through a hurricane in the past year. It passed by our state, but I still had to deal with like no power for a few hours. If there was a way I could just have like a local model to have a conversation with that doesn't always rely on a data connection. Because another thing with the government being shut down, and this also goes along with healthcare and not in workplace accommodations and school accommodations, with the government shut down and just trying to process that there's only so many resources to go around. And it's frustrating because you think, like, you see in the news, these companies are getting billions of dollars in investment for AI. And yet,
Right.
with our government shut down, people can come to an agreement when it comes to law on like medical supplies that people need, but they can't come to terms with opening the government back up and making sure that people on Medicare or Medicaid or going through the health insurance marketplace, that their cost of living doesn't go up. If you can't feel your best with your health, whether it's physically or emotionally, how can you be expected to show up in your community, in your personal life, and wanting to go to work? Like, if someone gives me a job offer and they say, hey, this job doesn't have any health insurance, but it goes above the limits for my state's Medicaid, it puts me in a bind between being able to accept an opportunity and not have health insurance provided by the workplace, or turning down employment and having to live within my means. It's all, and I know I'm not the only person going through this experience because there are hundreds of thousands of people across different states that are in similar situations where they may have a disability that may not necessarily hold them back completely from working, but
Mm.
because the limits for assets have not been updated since the 1970s, it's been holding people back because we're not stuck in the cost of living from the 70s. The cost of living has only gone up.
You're not wrong. And I think as things get more and more expensive, we're going to need more federal support. Because I was looking at a fiscal taxation report, and it showed that the US was one of the highest taxed countries on earth. We were in the top three. And surprise, surprise, the countries we call socialist were some of the least taxed. For example, both the UK and Canada are taxed less than most Americans. And what do they have? They have subsidized medical care, if not complete, just flat out universal health care. And people say, oh, well, we can't do that here. We have too many people. Well, China
If we
has
could
their
get,
own form of some form of universal healthcare. The only difference is if you get really, really sick, you just magically disappear. I have no idea what happened. They got lost in the paperwork. I just wild. I'm so sorry for your loss. You know.
mhm,
But I mean, all jokes aside, like that's the future we need, and I feel like we're in a moment of complacency. But I think once this comes to a close, this moment, I really think that we will be on track for something kind of cool. Um, I think there will be a huge. There's a gal that I follow named Lydia. She has a Bosnia astrology channel, but one thing she says is that America is destined for a revolution come 2026. Um, if you know
and part
anything,
of that
yeah,
comes with building up community and
yeah,
knowing that just because someone was on a different side of like the political spectrum or may not have had the exact same life experience as you doesn't make them more or less valid. It's just different. And part of what's made this country continue to work is knowing that we can unite as people, even if our beliefs are different, and still find common ground. And throughout history, when we've transitioned with new technologies like the printing press, the radio, the television, the telephone, and eventually the internet, we had to go through periods of change.
yeah.
Sometimes there were crashes with the market. Sometimes things, no matter how they turned out with the stock market, people's personal lives have changed. The way people work and connect with each other have also changed.
Are you familiar with a project called the Tree Line?
No, I don't think so.
So this project happened around the time of the Dust Bowl.
Hmm.
Basically, we destroyed all of our arable farmland in the plains region. And so, what did I think it was FDR? Yeah, it was FDR. He implemented the tree line project where they planted, I think it was like 48 million trees
Oh, okay.
in an effort to revitalize the soil. And as of the moment right now, the soil is near completely restored, and it is the biggest
And part
wall.
of that upkeep comes with having support for funding like the national parks and making
Mhm.
sure that the resources are protected. And I mean, I just saw something in the news where like restrooms aren't being cleaned, trash cans are overflowing,
Yep.
and volunteer people are having to come in to help make it more serviceable
I don't have the
during the
story pulled
shutdown.
up, but I had heard a rumor from a friend of mine saying that a guy concerned with the filth of a campsite out in Utah was arrested for throwing away trash because he was trespassing on government property, even though it was still open to the public, but he was out there just cleaning. But because he wasn't on the payroll and was
And because
doing.
of the government shutdown, the system of checks and balances is kind of screwed up right now
Mhm.
because certain things are not open as they should be.
Exactly. Well, and this is what's funny is like I was talking to a Canadian friend of mine. Do you know what happens when the government shuts down in a parliamentary system? It doesn't matter if it's the UK, India, Canada.
Tell me more.
This is hilarious. Um, all of the people go home, all of the people that are in the government, and they do something called a special election for every single elected official. Because if you're not going to work for the people, you don't deserve to be there. And I'm thinking to myself, we need that. I mean, the parliamentary system is not perfect, right? It has its flaws and it's kind of clunky, just like the way the American system is. Um, which is better? I could not tell you. But I do think we need to be aware of what we can do to help people. There are so many instances where people are not just struggling, but they're in positions where they're literally faltering and defaulting on loans because they have to choose between medical products,
Hmm.
medical bills, food, rent, mortgages. Um, I can't remember how many trillion dollars of credit card debt Americans have,
It's a
but
lot.
I remember it being way higher than any other developed country because we keep removing support systems.
Exactly.
People are saying, "Oh, well, why are the taxes in the U.S. so high?" And I'm thinking to myself, have you not seen the amount of intervention we have been doing globally? Like we signed a binding document with Ukraine that if Ukraine were to ever be invaded or attacked, that we would be their military. Americans forget that. But as soon as you bring it up, you get called a nut job or you get called Putin's puppet or when they initiate the draft, we're going to send you first. And I'm thinking to myself, you guys are missing the point. And I think that brings us to the next area that we really need to work on, which is
Yeah,
honesty and vulnerability.
and when it involves something like nuclear energy, I live not far from a nuclear energy plant, and I'm always concerned like if there's a catastrophe there, even though I'm so many miles away from them, there's still a risk because I'm in the general area. And if something catastrophic was to happen over in Ukraine, it doesn't just affect that one area, it affects all of Earth's atmosphere. And that gets spread around through the winds across all the different continents, including. So, what happens over there could come back around to us.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with that. And I don't think it has as much to do with nuclear power because I truly believe that nuclear power is way more sustainable and way cleaner. People are just terrified of it
Yeah,
because,
because of the risk.
it's not just the risk. Like, if you look at what happened at 3 Mile, right? I've done enough research to learn two things. What happened at 3 Mile was an absolute fluke, and anything that could have gone wrong went wrong because people weren't doing their jobs, which is exactly what happened in Russia with the same exact incident over there. But that's human issues. With these modern plants, there's instead of having 4 redundancies, there's over 100. One thing goes wrong, you would have a bigger concern with once a reactor has a catastrophic failure, not it exploding, but you being without power for over a month. You would have a higher
Hmm.
risk of that than, getting exploded. But I think that's almost as devastating as our modern era. And that's something interesting that I find Utah's doing that I feel like other states should be doing, right? Because a lot of Utahns are very stubborn people. For instance, Utah is the second driest state in the country, yet it consumes so much water. When you look at the charts, out of all of the fresh water, 75% of it is consumed by agriculture and farmers. The land can be farmed, but we do not plant trees or vegetation or plants that we
Right.
can rely on that are fine and safe for desert arid environments. We should be planting, trees that can handle drastic temperature changes. Believe it or not, olive trees can handle this. Not all of them, but some olive trees can handle frost. We should be
Mhm.
planting olive trees, but we don't plant olive trees. We should be planting tons of grapevines because they can handle frost and they like arid environments. But what do we not grow? Grapes.
And when it comes to health and hygiene, having to limit the amount of times you can flush your toilet, or having to take a shower, or having water to make sure that you're healthy. And
Well,
then,
all of those.
yeah, and if, I mean, to think about having to choose between how many times you take a shower so that you either don't run out of water or that your water bill isn't too high, it's stressful. And when
Yeah,
you
well,
have that stress with the responsibility of needing to show up, whether that's in school or at work, that's important too.
Well, exactly, and this is what's fascinating about Utah that they're doing, because local lawmakers, I think it was 2018, maybe it was 2019, they went over to the Middle East and Israel to see how they were handling moisture, because Israel receives about a third of the water Utah does.
Hmm.
It's one of the driest regions on the planet. It is so dry over there. Um, but they have hydroponic systems,
Mhm.
recycled water, like all of their toilets and stuff from all of the plants. So basically, the water goes down these vertical stacks. They have these white linen sheets that go over their plants so they don't dry out. And then the water will just kind of rush down these stacks of different plants. It'll go down to a collection system and through the layers of soil that'll also filter the water and whatever water doesn't get used. That'll then get rushed into a secondary treatment system, which gets treated with anti-algae chemicals that are safe for ingestion and human use. And those will go into secondary systems for toilets and urinals. That will
Mhm.
then get recycled back into a collection basin, cleaned up, and then resent out for the hydroponic systems. So, because the water loss from a plant, people think, oh, well, a plant will consume 100% of the water it's given. That's not true. Plants will only consume about 25 to 30% of the total water volume it is given. And some plants need even less than what you give them. And so you're literally just drowning out your plant. And so having vertical stacks, your plants are literally taking what they need. Well, when they tried to introduce this as a policy going forward in Utah, what happened? The farmers in Utah protested, "We don't need to change the way we've done things because the way we've been doing it works." I'm like, "You do realize we lose about 20% of the water in Utah due to evaporation because we still have open canals."
And part of that comes from the willingness to not accept when you're wrong about something, because people grow up with certain beliefs, they're raised certain ways to where their thinking and their patterns, their behaviors are very rigid. They're not as adjustable or flexible, even if the change could lead to something good. And part of that has to come with having a willingness to keep an open mind through collaboration, through listening. Like when we first met, if we immediately didn't like each other just off of basic details and not really taking the time to connect, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation.
Exactly, and it comes down to 2 things, in my opinion. 1, not only do we have to reconcile the past, but we also have to admit that we're not living in 1950, we're not living in
Right.
1970. We have to be able to have a certain level of vulnerability and say, "Yes, people have different needs than they did 100 years ago." I mean, disposable diapers were invented in what, the '60s, maybe the '70s?
Mm-hmm.
And so we've gone away from cloth diapers for so long that, we're most people aren't putting their infants and toddlers in cloth anymore. They're using something that goes to a landfill and takes a couple hundred years to decompose.
And another thing that they're working on is there's this one company that's figured out how to use mushroom mycelium to help break the materials down and turn it into something that would be good for the environment. And through the way it's set up, it wouldn't necessarily hurt the routines that people are used to. And that's often the biggest reason people try to push back against these new ideas is because they don't want things to change too much.
Well,
But
and this is
if we
what's
could
funny.
do like a
Yeah,
smaller change and be able to grow it at scale to the point to where people don't feel hurt by the cost or the way they have to adapt their routine, it could help out.
I
But
agree.
we
Well,
have to be willing to give it a try.
you do. Well, and this is why I say something's funny because Utahns, though they don't want to change their water consumption habits, they're really quick to adopt green electric systems. I kid you
Mhm.
not. One of the best-selling hybrid vehicle, period, is a Jeep Wrangler.
Mhm.
Why? Because it does 2 things very well at the same time. It's a plug-in hybrid. You have 30 miles of electric range. In Utah, everything is very close, especially when you're in the cities. You could go to work every single day and only use the gas engine on your way home from work, and even then, it would only be sparingly, it wouldn't be consistent. And where it gets even funnier is that a lot of Utahns almost last report saw about 62% of Utahns have solar panels on their houses. Compare that with anywhere else in the nation. That's one of the highest rates in the country because the average adoption nationwide is about 20 to 30%. But in Utah, it's exceptionally high. Why is that? Because Utahns want to keep their electric bill low. Um, they're-
Exactly. Like I live very close by to a solar data farm. I mean, well, like solar panel farm, and it's just this field full of solar panels that changes throughout the day, and all those resources are going towards farming or newer homes. But for me, as someone that's been with my power company for a long time and lives in a slightly older home, I would love to have solar energy. But the thing that's holding me back is the investment in getting it switched over and having to pay it off. But if power companies like the one I'm getting my electricity from would realize the value it would have in the customers long term, rather than throwing the cost off onto the consumer, being able to absorb some of it, would help out a lot. Like another thing I was thinking about, not too far from me in a town near Aiken, there is a $800 million data center being built by Meta, Facebook, and it's expected to operate sometime in 2027. But it's supposed to focus on AI, like 100 jobs, and part of that deal is to use 100% renewable energy. And when I think about that, they're able to invest all that time, money, and energy for just one data center in a small town when enough of those resources could probably go back towards powering a good chunk of homes in that town, if not further.
That's wild to me. And this all comes back to understanding how much we actually consume. We've gone from, hunter gatherers, farmers, and different levels of industrialization to an era of consumption. And you can't endlessly consume. We need to start blending these ideas, not just because they're ancient ideas, but we need to start blending these ideas together. Like, I'm seeing things all over the internet, especially when it comes to social and political things in the US, right? People want a peaceful revolution. There's a gal I follow who's a former Mormon, and I really appreciate her perspective because she's saying things like, we're going to have the denim revolution. Blue jeans were invented in the US. We should go out there with signs and be the people that inspire change in our communities, and that's healthy. And I think, with, some of the things that I saw in those reports you were sharing, and this kind of comes full circle here, like parents are waiting longer to change their children. That is not good because that leads to skin degradation, it leads to rashes, blisters, different irritations. Because bodily waste, although a natural process, is technically toxic still. There's methane, there's different nitrates, and all of these excrements that come out of our body. It's natural. But when parents can't afford to get the products they need, that's when we start looking at everything and being honest and vulnerable, saying, we can't do this anymore. We can't afford this anymore. I can't keep using Affirm and Klarna to buy my groceries. I can't keep doing this. The PayPal Pay in 4 is great for a lot of people. I remember when that was introduced, and I thought that was going to be game changer, right? Instead, it's turned into a necessity instead of, hey, I've been saving up for a long, long time, but I can keep a lot more of my money over the next 4 weeks. I could either pay cash and not have as much money over the next 4 weeks, or over the next 4 weeks, as I'm using the pay in four, I can keep a little bit of my money each month and I'll have more to put in savings at the end of this. Right? It
Yeah,
went from that to, I can't live without it now. And so we have to be honest with things that are happening. And I really think we are starting to see this because, Generation Z and millennials, well, I should say older Generation Z, right? They're starting to have kids. And there's something that they're doing with their children that's kind of fascinating because I've seen this with my buddy Cody. Um, he has several children, and his kids are celebrating every single little victory, and they are the most rambunctious little people I have ever seen. Um, but what is fun about his kids is he lets them decide. He sits down with his oldest, right? He's, I think, 8. And he says, what extracurricular activity do you want to do? It's not pigeonholed to sports. If he wanted to do an arts class, if he wanted to do ballet or whatever, he said he'd totally let him do it. And I think that is the difference, right? because when you're vulnerable with your child and allowing them to make their own decisions within reason, they start to become more creative and more free willed, yet again, all within reason. But I think that's healthier than, oh, well, we're just going to put you in soccer. You have too much energy. Oh, we're going to put you in baseball because you have too much energy. I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's constructive. I think that's destructive. And we need to go back to an era where we can be honest with not only who we are, but with the needs of each individual person we impact on a daily basis. I don't know if you would agree with that, but we're kind of running out of time
Yeah,
here. So I wanted to
I
get
was
some of
just
your
gonna
final
ask for
thoughts.
like you personally, when it comes to like getting the supplies that you need every day, have you found it difficult? Do you wish there was more room for improvement? As
Well, I,
someone that is, well, you're wanting to work, but you're also at the same time feeling like you have to live within your means because you have to manage rent and electricity and all these other things. How do you think it compares to what you wanted in childhood and like the process of trying to accept yourself compared to where you are now?
I see. Well, real quick, your face is kind of out of frame. Oh, there we go. um, but I feel like for me, like you have to enjoy what you do. Um, as a former construction worker, I can say that, there are people that truly love that industry. And I think that's wonderful and that they should be, doing what they need to in order to feel successful and happy. Excuse me. But on the backside of that, for me, I was laid off in February, and that was the biggest blessing in my entire life because I was literally destroying my body. And I don't think anyone should have to do that to themselves just to collect a paycheck, just to pay for things that they need or want. It goes both ways, right? But I think that for a lot of people, they think, oh, well, I can't afford to get a job because if I do, then blah, 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 this, and this. And then they start rambling off. And, I keep hearing people, oh, you just need to get a job. You need to get a job. People need to find that outlet. Like I found out something today. Um, there is a provision in Ohio that enables you to start a business without any liability insurance as a sole proprietor, where you pay very little to no taxes um, until you exceed $100,000 in revenue. But at that point, you should have an LLC, right? Because $100,000 in revenue, you could get sued for anything and your entire revenue would be gone. And being a sole proprietor, there is no liability insurance, there's no protections for you. But I think,
Exactly. And I also was thinking about like, let's say you run a website, for example. If someone doesn't like your free speech, they can try to hold you liable. And with the way they're trying to change the laws now, it becomes a bigger risk to business owners, to content creators, to people running their own websites.
no, I totally agree with that. But this all comes to vulnerability and enjoying what you do. I know that your initial question was like, do I feel like there's a risk versus reward for working? I enjoy what I do. As an auto tech for Best Buy, I love what I do because it balances my tinkering and my ability to play with things with the ability to help people. It kind of blends everything that I love, which is technology, cars, and people. And, as an autistic person, I have a lot of special interests, especially when it comes to
Mhm.
technology and cars. And so this is kind of best of both worlds, and
Yeah.
it can provide the needs that I have to take care of.
Yeah. As
But
much as I love Best Buy, it's like I have to budget the cost of showing up to work, being prepared to be dressed, responsible for managing my needs and my time because there's like balance between what you do in your personal life and how you show up at work. You
Oh, I
have to be
absolutely
prepared
agree.
in uniform. You have to be prepared for the products people ask questions about. You have to have a willingness to listen and understand someone, even if they might seem different from you. And that can come to almost any job. But part of that includes the motivation to show up, because I don't want to show up to a job where I'm only being paid $7.25 an hour to do something that's not particularly interesting to me, compared to having a job that excites me, motivates me, gives me a chance to learn and connect.
And I think I'll leave this as kind of like the final thought as we're closing out here. Um, if you're on the autism spectrum, embrace your special interests because I truly believe that is the career or field of focus you should have. And if there is not a job that'll pay for the lifestyle you want, start it. Because learning what I did yesterday about Utah or Ohio's ability to help stimulate businesses, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Because in Utah, there's no programs that are similar. There's not a single one. And so I think that, find out about your surroundings. Find something to love about your community and embrace it. Well, Jesse, I want to thank you for being here. I'll let you have the final word, and then I'll let you go. I'll close out the live stream, and we'll go from there.
Sure, I enjoyed having this conversation with you, and I think it's important that we try to connect as people, not just as one side or the other, or one person's experience versus another. Connections is what helps us grow. We can't control other people, we can't control places or things that people have or things that people choose to do, but we can control how we respond. And when we're able to respond with listening, with connecting, and with understanding, that is how you continue the cycle of learning throughout your life, is being able to accept someone else's perspective beyond yourself. And I think that's why the conversation we had today is important.
I agree. Well, thank you so much, Jesse. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
So there you have it, guys. Jesse's a great guy. It was wonderful having him on. I want to thank everybody for watching this live stream, if anyone is watching this live stream right now. But I will say, everything that is going on just nationally, globally, it's hard to get lost. It's it's hard to feel seen. It's easy to get lost in the moment. Um, I almost said that backwards. But I really think it is important that we take all of these things, regardless of our backgrounds. Jesse is someone I would say isn't just an advocate. He is someone striving to help people find the resources that they need. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the live stream, I'm going to go ahead and include these documents because some of these statistics he included were very saddening to me. I feel like a lot of people don't look for this type of stuff because, their children grow up and they don't need these products anymore. Some people will still need these things. And as things get more expensive and we're unable to come to a consensus on how to achieve certain things, life is just going to get harder. So, this was kind of a fun conversation because it was a little all over the place, but we had a core message, which is vulnerability. Enjoy where you're at in the moment, live in the moment. If I hadn't given Ohio a chance, I don't think I would have learned what I did. And I think that is kind of wild. So, with that being said, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this special episode of the Platypus Playground. And I hope you guys are enjoying the new format. And I'll catch you guys on the next one.